it's a bit like parking in central London. If you take your car into the city of London and you can drive around a few roads where you want to, say you're in Knightsbridge or something, you drive around a few roads and you miss every car pulling out and leaving a space. But if you park up and watch 12 spaces, sooner or later one of those 12 spaces will become empty and somebody will come back to their car and leave, and you're parked. And it's a bit like that, I think, with street photography. I like to stand in a good spot where I can see several good shots or potential shots and just wait, watching them all, and sooner or later something will happen.
Welcome to the Photo Mentors podcast. This week's guest is street and commercial photographer Nick Turpin. Nick started his career as a staff photographer at The Independent, and then he headed off into the world of advertising and commercial photography, all shot in his street documentary style. Now, Nick actually uses the term candid public photography to describe what he does, as it's really more about how humans interact in a variety of different public spaces, not obviously just the literal street. Nick is probably best known for his On the Night Bus project, where he photographed people through the steamed up windows of a London night bus. It's a project that he goes on to talk about later in this episode, as well as his The French, Autos and Exodus projects, the latter of which he actually shot during London being in lockdown during 2020. As usual, I asked Nick the same 10 questions that I asked everybody else, and what follows is a really interesting insight into how Nick takes his images. If you're interested in street photography or documentary photography, then you're sure to learn a lot from this episode. In fact, there's something there regardless of what type of photography you do, and that's really what I want Photo Mentors to be about. Talking to other photographers and filmmakers, learning more about their processes, and then reflecting on what we do ourselves. Now, enough of me, let's crack on and get into conversation with Nick Turpin. So Nick, thank you very much for agreeing to come on the Photo Mentors podcast. We start off by doing some very quick questions, kind of getting to know you ones. And then we go into a deep dive where we talk more about your photography and what you do. And hopefully I'll learn something, which means that the audience will all learn something listening. So first up,
I hope so.
First camera. What was your first camera?
I think my first camera was a little Olympus OM10. I think it was given to me by my father when I started doing photography at school. Some friends, two other lads and myself, when we were comprehensive school, we reopened the school's darkroom, tidied it all up and got it working again. And I think that's how I came to have my first camera, the little Olympus OM10.
And right now, you're going to leave the house. We're going to go camera and lens. So what camera and lens are coming in your camera bag?
Yeah, it's easy because the lens is fixed to the camera. I love the little X100 range of Fujifilm cameras. So I would probably take the X100V, which is their latest one, which has a little 23mm lens on it, which is, you can do so many things with that. I'm a street photographer, and it's just a perfect sort of general view camera. So that's what I would take with me. It's a good all-rounder. You're
the second person to mention that camera, and I've only done 5 of these. So that's fair play to Fuji with the X100 there. Joe Allen also said that it would be the camera that he took with him to shoot street and travel with. So it's Fuji obviously doing something right with it.
Yeah, you can do portraits up close, but it's got the quality for standing back and doing a landscape or a cityscape. And the lens is just perfect for street photographers from one side of the pavement to the other. And it's super quick to use, very, very lightweight, just fits in the palm of your hand. There's so many good things about it. And, when a company develops a camera over a period of years, they kind of get rid of all the little wrinkles. And that's the stage that I think Fuji have got to with the X100V. It's, they've ironed out all the wrinkles, and it really is a lovely little machine now.
It's a great camera. I really like it as well. What else is coming in your camera bag that is non-photographic?
Well, as a street photographer, anything I put in my camera bag, I have to carry with me for miles and miles. So I'm quite aware of what I put in there. So most days I keep it to an absolute minimum. So I have a waterproof, which I take with me everywhere, and probably a lens cloth, and then just the spare bits and pieces. Probably just the waterproof is the only thing which is non-photographic that I stick in there. I literally try to keep, as few things in there as possible. Little battery maybe to for my phone if I'm out all day in the city. But yeah, I'm very aware of every gram that I put in there.
Okay, and I think we probably guessed the answer to this already, but where's your favourite place to take photographs?
Well, I could say the street, but I'm rather fascinated by the public realm in general. As soon as you cross the your kind of doorstep into the public space, I think you're in a relationship with society when you do that, and that's the thing that fascinates me. So I'd say the public realm, parks and galleries and anywhere that the public come and go freely. I love to go and watch them and make pictures.
What is it about that fascinates you?
I guess, photography, I consider myself a documentary photographer, so I have no real interest in working in a studio or creating fictions. I'm interested in reality and real life. And I'm also quite interested, I think, in sort of culture, our cultural life, our social life, sort of the history of the street. It's all there, played out in public, what people wear, the technology they're carrying, eating their sandwiches out of a plastic triangle. All these things change. If I look at historical photographs of London, people aren't carrying mobile phones and so on. It's the pictures that we make in public places create this rather interesting record, I think. And, I think that's the fascination for me. It's all part of that documenting of the space that interests me.
How many camera bags do you own?
A lot, but most of them are at the garage and I don't use them very regularly. I have 3 which I use, I guess, for work. So I have 2 little rucksacks. One is very, very slimline waterproof rucksack, which I take doing just candid street photography. I have a bigger rucksack which I take on, editorial or photojournalistic sort of jobs, which will take 2 DSLRs and 2 or 3 lenses. And then I have an even bigger sort of bag, which will be for sort of advertising jobs where I'm shooting tethered and taking a laptop and taking a power source and all sorts of different things. So yeah, 3 stages of rucksack I have.
Yeah, that's I'm very similar at the moment. I've got the little shoulder bag and then 2 different backpacks and then a load of other backpacks that are just kind of I'm trying to get rid of but can't quite bring myself to do it. So they're in storage at the moment, and one day I'll be like, right, I can actually get rid of these. They no longer serve a purpose. I'm sorted as far as camera bags are done now.
I think if you haven't used it in the last 3 years, it could probably go. I've got huge Pelican cases and things up in storage that I don't really use anymore.
It's just difficult. I think in your head you think, but there's going to be that time where I might need to go and do this, and then you keep storing stuff, and it just gets stored for that just in case, like all those bits in the kitchen drawer. Okay, let's go on with the main questions then. So what is the image that you've shot that means the most to you?
Well, if I exclude sort of family photographs, which mean a lot to me for other reasons, like sentimental reasons, I think it's probably, and if I exclude some of the projects that I've done, I guess there's a picture I took when I was just switching from working in black and white to working in colour, one of the first colour pictures I made on the street. And it's a photograph of 2 guys wearing hard hats, 2 workmen walking towards the camera, and to the right of them are 2 men in suits with bald heads. They look very vulnerable, and they're walking away from the camera. And this is just very nice juxtaposition. And I like it because it's one of the first pictures that I took which kind of I felt worked on different levels. So I think prior to that, I was making pictures that were funny. They were humorous observations. They were rather like Elliot Erwitt. He was a big influence on me. And so you looked at them and you laughed. But this picture, I felt also had this sort of, it made a record of the way that the City of London was changing, and the fact that in the City of London, the land values are so high that really you see all you see in the City of London are men in suits and construction workers.
Yeah.
And so this picture initially makes you laugh or smile, but it also, as time has gone on, I've realised, has made a record of London in the 2000s. When every square foot is being redeveloped constantly, and the city is changing. And even now, looking back at that picture, which I probably took about 18, 19 years ago now, probably, even if I go back there now, there's a Crossrail station has been built there, and the cafe on the corner has turned into something else, and the Broadgate Centre behind has been redeveloped and looks different. So even in that short time since I took the picture to now, it's become even more of an interesting historical document to me,
Is that important for you as a legacy? Is that kind of one of your goals, is to create kind of an archive of these images to look back on, or is it sort of coincidental and it's just a nice byproduct of what you do?
I think partly I like to leave behind a record. I enjoy looking at the pictures of London that photographers have made in the past, and contributing to that, I think, is a satisfying thing to do. But I think really, if I'm honest, for street photography is kind of a more selfish thing for me. I think I find out about the world and my place in it through watching other people and seeing how other people behave. I like to sort of analyse the society that I'm living in and its values, and just how people behave in a public place, I think, is very interesting. It's very revealing if you've got your eyes open. And I think, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but that's partly why I've moved from these single image street photographs with a self-contained story to doing series and projects like On the Night Bus and Autos, and some of these series that I've done, which have gone on to sort of explore some of those issues that interest me a little bit more. So I think, the Elliot Hurwitz sort of funny pictures, I love doing those. It was my entry into street photography. But I feel like I'm demanding more now from myself and from candid public photography.
Let's bring it back down a little bit. What has been your best photographic accessory purchase?
Well, I have a little viewfinder which fits on the back of my cameras. So this is more for when I'm working, I guess, because as a street photography, it's difficult to make a living taking street photographs. So I obviously do a lot of commercial work, and when I'm out in the street, I often find it very difficult to judge the picture that I've just taken, to see what's going on, the exposure, that everything's sharp, everything's in the right place, that sort of thing, especially when I'm working with an art director or whatever. And so this little LCD sort of viewfinder fits onto the back of my Canons, and it's like a little portable dark cloth almost. It allows me to just put it to my eye. I wear it around my neck when I'm working, and it just snaps on with a magnet. I can very quickly zoom in and out of the image, move around, check everybody's expression, make sure everyone's got their eyes open, all that kind of thing. And sometimes if I'm working with my Canons on a very wide, fast lens, 51.2 or something, I actually shoot through the viewfinder, through the LCD screen at the back with this little viewfinder, because it allows me to zoom in and check the critical focus on somebody's eyes, then zoom out and take the shot. I don't always trust the autofocus for those sorts of things when I'm, really, really wide open like that. If you've got 0.5 centimetre of depth of field moving backwards and forwards, you need to know it's on the eyes.
Yeah, exactly.
So I find it a brilliant tool for helping me see, what I'm shooting and what I'm actually getting, without having to, always tether to a laptop or send pictures to an iPad separately, which can often sort of break your flow. If you're trying to recreate your street photography for a commercial client, you want to work as closely in the same way kind of thing as you get your street photographs as you can. So that's probably been the most useful little thing which I've probably bought.
What are you currently learning, or what was the last thing that you learned?
Well, this is an interesting question actually, because I've taken the advantage of lockdown to teach myself a lot of new skills and really actually quite change direction in a way. So when lockdown first started, I thought I would look around and see what other photographers were doing, how they were picturing it, how they were responding to it. And I saw a lot of various things emerging, a lot of portraits through windows at the beginning, and some of them were very nice. And then a lot of empty streets, people recording the deserted streets. And then sort of still live, lots of pictures of masks on the pavement and things like that, discarded masks and stuff. And, I kind of thought, well, I'd see what everyone's doing before I kind of dive in. And I felt like, I shoot a lot in the financial district. I always have. I've always been drawn to the financial district of London. And I felt like that's what I wanted to record because, I had some work there for one of my clients, Transport for London, and I was in the city, and it was just so bizarre to be in this place, which is so busy, and has this incredible, hugely expensive infrastructure, the financial district, all those offices and banks and insurance companies and financiers. It's all, all this glass and steel was just humming away there. And I felt this is what I want to photograph. But I didn't feel like the kitten that I was normally using was kind of right for it. I felt like I'm generally photographing people. So I want a small, fast camera like the X100V. But for the city, to photograph the spaces, the empty spaces and the architecture, I felt like I needed a new tool. And so I invested in a tilt shift lens, one of Canon's tilt shift lenses, which is an expensive item and something I've not used before, because I really wanted to control the way that I was photographing these spaces in these buildings. And I loved it, I have to say. When I first went out, I found it difficult to use. It was a real leap for me. I had to really practice with it. I would frame up the scene and then adjust the shift, and I'd find myself compensating, so I'd be shifting up and then looking down with the camera at the same time. So I had to really kind of train myself to use this thing handheld. Obviously they're designed really to be used on a tripod, but as a street photographer I wanted to try and use this handheld. So that was the starting point. So I shot a project using that, which is this project called Exodus that I did, showing the empty streets. And this kind of really got me interested in architectural photography a little bit, which I've always been interested in design and architecture, but I felt like this could be a very interesting area for me to explore, because I've always been interested in the public realm. And this is almost like an extension of street photography in a way. It's where I always work, but it's focusing not on the people, but on the spaces and the structures. So the last few weeks and months, I have been shooting quite a lot of architectural photography, quite a lot of buildings at all different times of the day. And I've been sort of researching the techniques that architectural photographers use, shooting multiple frames to retain highlights and shadow detail and all this kind of thing. So, that's basically what I've been doing. And now I'm actually, one of the jobs I'm actually working on at the moment is for a developer shooting actually the development of a building, which has come out of that. It's one of the first jobs I'm shooting with this new equipment and these new techniques that I've learnt over lockdown.
That's great. I think that's how it should be, shouldn't it? A sort of a personal body of work should be something that you're interested in learning. Then obviously the idea is that then shapes the kind of work that you want to do. So to immediately sort of be able to use those skills and use them commercially and to make it part of your living is, well, kind of every photographer's dream. Do you think it will influence your street photography using the sort of tilt shift lens?
Well, certainly the Exodus project, I still consider that street photography, really. I'm wandering around, nothing is staged, it's completely candidly shot. And I find these beautiful scenes and kind of lay in wait, set a little trap, I suppose, for people to walk through and be in the right place. So, expanding what street photography is and can be is something which I'm very interested in doing. And I think there's a lot of interesting photography being done where street photography meets photojournalism, where street photography meets, art photography and so on. I think those are quite interesting areas of development. I'm very keen for street photography to remain a documentary, way of working. I think if you started staging images or manipulating them in post-production and so on, it would become something else. Then you're crossing a line. But within those sort of interesting boundaries of documentary photography, I think there's a lot of really quite interesting work being done. I'm very interested now in photographers who are actually working in those areas. I mean, for example, there's a photographer, Nick who's he's sort of a photojournalist, really, but he shoots in a way in such a beautifully observed way, like a street photographer. Each of his individual photographs is a self-contained, beautiful story, and yet they hung together to tell a story, perhaps about the Mediterranean or the Soviet Union or wherever he's been shooting. So, I kind of consider him half a street photographer, half a photojournalist. So there's lots of people like that who I think are working in very interesting areas and making very interesting work.
How would you define street photography, or would you not even kind of bother? Is it kind of that open to interpretation, and rightly so?
I'm really in favour of a broad definition, really. I mean, I've thought about this a few years ago, and I thought, street photography is a phrase that we've inherited. I don't think it particularly describes what we do. I mean, it's much more than being about just a place. It's an approach, really. But I use the phrase candid public photography. I've used it a couple of times in this interview already, and it's a phrase which I think actually describes what we do. So the pictures are candidly shot; they're not staged. They're all in a public place, not just the street, any public place. A park or an art gallery or a shopping centre or whatever. Anywhere the public come and go. And then it's photography, and the word photography means drawn with light. It doesn't mean drawn with a computer afterwards. So I think if you're doing a great deal of post-production on your work, spending more time on the computer than you did with the camera, I would suggest that perhaps you're not doing street photography, So I think those three words actually rather nicely encapsulate what I consider to be street photography, but still leave a very broad, a very broad description, or very inclusive kind of definition.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Who or what has been the biggest influence on your photography?
Yeah, this is a really difficult question, isn't it? Because I'm somebody who draws on lots of influences in my work, and not just photographers, but art and painting and the history of art. And to single out a single person is very, very difficult. I think probably if I had to choose one, I would say the American photographer Joel Meyerowitz, probably. When I do talks, I show an image of his that he took in Paris in 1967 of a young guy. It's called Fallen Man, a picture of a young guy having a fit or lying on the ground outside a metro station in Paris. And this picture is the most incredibly complex story. You can look around this frame. There's like 18 people in the picture. There's a street full of cars. And there's such wonderful things going on in this picture. The guy on the ground is wearing a suit. He's like a white-collar worker. There's another guy stepping over him with a hammer, and he's a blue-collar worker. He's in like overalls. And there's just this lovely clash, not just physically, but of sort of class, I suppose, if you like, working class, and this suited guy. There's just so much happening in this one picture. It's the picture that made me realise how much you could do with a single frame. And I worked for nearly a decade at the independent newspaper in the late 80s, early 90s, and I was a newspaper photographer. I was recording and shooting stories for them. And often I'd go and shoot a story, I'd go to Ascot or something and shoot, come back with 10 or 15 pictures that told the story of the day. And this was kind of a revelation to me, seeing Joel's picture, that, how much you can do with one frame. And I think that really set me on the way to being a street photographer. And also, Joel was also the author of Bystander. He and Colin Westerbeck, a curator and writer on photography, the two of them published Bystander, The History of Street Photography. And, that was the first kind of compendium of street photography, I guess. And I think reading that, his book also made me realise, that's what I am, that's what I want to do. So yeah, he's been quite a big influence on me. And, now I've met him quite a few times, and he knows that, he knows this, that, he's a big influence on me. And recently they republished Bystander. They update it every few years, and now I have one of my street photographs in the book Amazing. That kind of inspired me. Wow. 20 years ago. So, that's very, very nice to sort of contribute to the history of street photography myself in that way. What more could you ask for as a street photographer?
Do you want to tell me what image you've got featured in the book?
Yes, it's a picture that I took. I was living in France for 9 years, and when my children were small. And I didn't really know the country, and I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it. And I set off to photograph the 25 biggest cities in France, and I did this project called The French. And in a small alpine village, I saw a young lad, about 12 or 13. He came out of a doorway with the most enormous tricolour flag. And it was all faded and dated. It looked like a very old flag. And he started waving this flag so dramatically that it just looked like, it reminded me of like revolutionary France.
Yep.
It looked like liberty leading the people, this famous historical reference. I was saying earlier that I'm influenced by painting and lots of other things. And, I studied history of art and I love modern contemporary photographs that reference art history in that way. And that picture is a favourite of mine. And I found out basically his family were clearing the attic of the house and they found his grandfather's Second World War tunic and flag in the attic. And I was passing just at the moment that he ran out into the street to wave it. And so that's the picture that's in the current edition of Bystander.
I'm going to go.
Which is a great book if you're interested in street photography. Bystander: A History of Street Photography is terrific. Street Photography Now is a great survey of the modern scene. There's some really terrific books out there if you want to find out more about it.
That's an amazing moment of chance, though, isn't it? To happen to be passing just as something seemingly quite insignificant happens. They wouldn't have been thinking anything like that, and then just for you to be going by as a photographer and putting out the camera and just recording that moment, it's when you
it's unrepeatable.
Yeah,
I think that's what the great thing about street photographs, particularly. I mean, street photographs are part of the documentary tradition, and a lot of photojournalism is also unrepeatable. You're photographing history happening and so on. But there's something about capturing a little unrepeatable moment of everyday life that's really has always appealed to me.
Okay, so which or what photographic technique do you wish that you learnt much earlier in your career, in your photographic journey?
This is actually one of the hardest questions, isn't it? There's so many things. I guess with street photography, which has probably been the majority of my practice over the last 30 years. This is my 32nd year of doing this as a living. There are various things which have come along, which I've adopted, like back button focusing, for example, is fantastic. That's something which I always teach young street photographers. I suppose, there are techniques that I use now as a street photographer. I used to go out and just walk the streets, and often I'd come back with nothing. I had no real strategies. I was very much relying on coming across a fantastic picture, or, my hit rate was quite low, I suppose. And I think basically I've learnt to use, scenes. I think a great street photograph is beautifully composed, and it's a fantastic moment. Those two things in the same frame generally, make a great street photograph. And I've learned, I guess, that really you can find a fantastic scene that's beautifully lit, and you've almost got half your picture already there in front of you.
Yeah.
You just need the moment. You need the actors, the players to come along, and I think since I've started using, that's one of the strategies that I use, and I think, my hit rate is much higher now that I find these beautiful scenes and I compose them. I'm very disciplined. I stand there and I don't change the frame. I stand exactly on the same spot until something wonderful happens in front of me. And, I think that's one example of a number of different strategies which I now kind of use when I'm shooting and have helped me make many more pictures than I used to, I think.
No, it's a useful bit of advice because obviously working for years at Amateur Photographer magazine and still testing cameras now, you'd leave, the camera would come in, you'd get it out of the box, you'd put the battery on charge, and then within an hour you'd be like, right, I've got to go because I've got a deadline on this. And you'd look back and I'd taken a few hundred images and none of them would ever really stand out because you're kind of walking and you're looking for pictures, but you're never really stopping and looking for pictures. I was just kind of walking. Whereas I think if, like you say, the times where I've had a better success rate are the times where I've just said, I'm going to go to hang around this building for an hour because I know the light's going to be great. And then I'll stop and I'll take, I'll walk away with 2, 3, 4 images where I'm, really pleased with them out of the sort of 20, 30 you may have taken. But you always kind of know when you've got it. You know when you've got that one image, like you say, because something's just happened. And I think a lot of it's patience as well. I'm not a particularly patient
I always think
person.
it's a bit like parking in central London. If you take your car into the city of London, there are, obviously at the moment it's slightly different, but generally it's very difficult to park.
Yeah. And
you can drive around a few roads where you want to, say you're in Knightsbridge or something, you drive around a few roads and you miss every car pulling out and leaving a space.
Yeah.
But if you park up and watch 12 spaces, sooner or later one of those 12 spaces will become empty, and somebody will come back to their car and leave, and you're parked. And it's a bit like that, I think, with street photography. I like to stand in a good spot where I can see several good shots or potential shots and just wait, watching them all. And sooner or later something will happen. I've even had occasions where I've been standing on a street corner and two fantastic things have happened simultaneously, and I've had to choose which one to photograph. I had a particularly painful experience on a corner of New York once when I was watching a security guard was lowering a big flag, giant flag, from a flagpole, and as it came down closer and closer to the ground, I began to realise quite how big this thing was. It was like 5 or 6 meters. And just as it was getting close to him and beginning to envelop him and beginning to make a nice picture, on the opposite corner, there was a delivery guy standing in the back of a UPS van, and he had his hands in the loops either side of the shutter door at the back.
Yep.
And he had a little beard and he looked exactly like Jesus Christ on the cross. His arms were stretched out. He had one wrist through one loop and one wrist through the other loop on the other side of the shutter. And he just, for a moment there, and I literally, oh my God, these are two amazing photographs. Which one am I going to go for? And I went with the flag. But I often wonder about the UPS delivery guy.
Better? I remember, I don't know if you remember, we were, you did a photo walk around East London to promote a company's camera,
I remember.
Must have been quite a while ago. And I remember we turned a corner. We were just sort of around Brick Lane, somewhere around there maybe. I can't exactly remember where. And there was about 3 kind of English, Italian, I think. They may have been Turkish. I can't remember. But they were kind of Mediterranean guys. And they were trying to get an ice cream fridge through a door for a shot.
Doorway.
And it didn't fit. I mean, it kind of did. That they obviously
were pushing and pulling and shoving.
Yeah, there was about a millimetre play to get this thing through. And then all of a sudden, they've got about 10 or 15 photographers around them. And I often think actually the photo probably was the fact there were all these photographers standing around these 3 quite irate and frustrated looking guys. But yeah, I just remember the light wasn't very good, and I couldn't for the life of me get a photo, partly because there were so many other photographers trying to get the shot. But yeah, it's all about those, you never know what's going to happen, and just those little moments, just like you say, finding the humour in it, or finding the kind of, whoa, that's amazing.
And when I go to do street photography, I'll arrive at London Bridge and get off the train, and I'll start walking, and I'm just looking for a reason to stop. And it doesn't have to be a very big reason. It can actually be quite a small thing. It could just be a reflection of something in a window, or just the light is really beautiful, bouncing off two skyscrapers or something. It can be a very small thing, but I'm just looking for that first thing. When I curate pictures together, so I'm looking for the first element, and then I can try and find the second and third element to get in the frame at the same time. And that's how I build up more and more complex pictures when I'm on the streets. So I'm always looking for the first thing. Sometimes it can be a mobile thing. You come out the station and someone walks past carrying a great big lampshade, or a great big pot plant or something. And I just think there it is, and I follow them. That's how the hard hats picture happened. I was following the guys with the bald heads, and the hard hats men came the other way. So often the first thing can be something static, or it can be something mobile. It's just being able to recognise that it's worth stopping for or worth following. That's, you develop an instinct for that, I think.
How sort of self-conscious do you feel? Because you've been doing it so long now, I guess, that it's something you must get used to. But do you ever still feel sort of self-conscious? Do you try and be very discreet and unseen, or what's your kind of approach to that? Well,
I actually think there are some people who are invisible on the streets and can learn to be, and there are other people who never master it. I have a street photographer friend who's got about 15 pictures of people giving him the finger. It's just he just seems to be one of those people who get spotted. People see him taking a picture. I'm 6'3" with a shaved head, and I just present myself on the street in a way that's very inoffensive, I think. And I don't make eye contact with people that I want to photograph. If I see a scene, I want to watch it unfold, so I don't want them to see me. I use the small camera, obviously, and I have all sorts of little techniques for, if they look at me, I even sometimes have a map with me or an apple or something. I'll do something else if they look up. just so that to give them a reason why I'm hanging around or whatever. And, it's just never really been a problem for me, I guess. I've never really felt self-conscious because nobody really sees me. I feel like I'm gliding through the streets a bit like a little ghost, I can't really tell you how or why exactly. I mean, I try and teach that when I do workshops and things, but I think it's very much to do with the way that you present yourself. You don't want to look like a photographer, and I don't carry lots of DSLRs and that kind of thing. Just to, I look like a tourist almost, I guess.
Do you still shoot through the viewfinder?
Oh, I only shoot through the viewfinder. Yeah. Yeah. No, I never hit shoot from the hip. I never use the LCD screen because composition is so crucial to my photographs. That, I mean, the other thing I do is I always shoot with the same camera and the same focal lengths. If someone comes on a workshop with me and they bring a zoom, I tape it up. I set it at, 35 millimeter equivalent and put a bit of gaffer tape on and just say, leave that, zoom with your feet. You haven't got time for zooming in and out. It breaks your empathy and your connection with the people you're photographing to be doing too much with the camera. You need to have as little to do with the camera as possible. I often say to people that street photography's really got nothing to do with actually making pictures in some ways. It all happens in your head, recognizing an amazing picture, getting yourself in the right position for it all to come together. The actual exposure, making a record of it is almost just the last element, really. And I think, quite often I see pictures and take them even when I'm out without my camera, which is rare, but it's an intellectual process, street photography. You see someone's cleverness there, you see their wit when you look at a series of really great street photographs. It's something to admire. And I think that's what really appeals to me about it as well.
So what has been your favourite photographic failure and what did you learn from it?
Using the word favourite is quite difficult for a failure for me, but
it's my. But yes,
I have a good failure I can tell you about.
Okay, let's do it. I'll shut up.
But it's not something I like to dwell on. Really, I wouldn't say it's a favourite. No, I guess in terms of experiences and learning, I left the independent newspaper and became a commercial photographer, and I started doing sort of annual reports and things like that. Some working for design companies. And then I got my first kind of really big campaign in America and shooting in New York. And I hadn't been out there very much. I wasn't very familiar with it and the system there. And so I was working for a big agency, Ogilvy and Mather in New York, and we were shooting for a computer company called SAP, I think it is. And it was like a black and white ad. And it was in a hotel, the W Hotel in Times Square, so it cost us a fortune to hire it. And, I let them talk me into working in a way which I don't normally work. So they made me shoot this ad. They love the spontaneity and the humour in my work, the observational sort of documentary sense of my work, but they wanted me to shoot it on a Hasselblad, with a digital back tethered to an iMac, with like 30 people in the room, all these clients and people were there. I had a dozen assistants. It just became a great big entourage. And, I shot this thing, but I wasn't happy with it. I don't think the art director was happy with it. The ad ran, they used it and it wasn't a disaster, kind of wasn't unusable. It's just, it wasn't my work. It didn't have the feeling and quality of my work. And I've never done that again. I've never allowed anybody, to talk me into using bigger cameras and so on. I mean, partly the little cameras that I use, like the Fuji now, have such great sensors in them. Time's moved on. This was a few years ago, but, I always say to, students and so on, when you get a commercial job, shoot it exactly the way that you shot the portfolio that got you that job. Yep. Do not let them talk you into, doing things differently. Be a prima donna about it. Really put your foot down because, everybody will be disappointed if you don't. So I guess that, it's kind of a bit of a failure. And, I was being paid a lot of money and there were big expectations. And you want everybody to be delighted when you're doing those sorts of jobs. I only did that once and never again. And now I probably have a bit of a reputation for sort of saying, nope, I'm going to do it my way. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that.
That anecdote is exactly why I asked this question, because there's a real learning there for everybody out there, and it comes back to what we mentioned right at the start was, you do the work in a certain way to get the jobs that you kind of want to do, and obviously that was a turning point for you in terms of I've learned something from this, and that's not going to happen again, and that's a great takeaway I think for anybody listening as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I would say also, it's not really a failure, but another big lesson for me, I think, very early on was when I went to an ad agency. I was shooting at that time. I was kind of shooting lit portraits on location. I did like surfers on the beach. I'd take down a huge softbox and light them. Beautiful soft lighting and this kind of thing. And I went to an ad agency with a few of these in my portfolio and a little bit of street photography at the back. And the art buyer went through my portfolio, and she got, she just closed the book and she looked at me and she said, "Don't try to be Annie Leibovitz. We can afford her. we can afford to commission Annie Leibovitz herself. We don't, this street photography at the back. This is you. This is what you should be doing. This is your sense of humor. This is your character. Be yourself, and success and money will come." And she was absolutely right. And so, not, as a photographer, not trying to be somebody else, not reproducing, the work of your heroes, but actually finding your own unique way of doing things is absolutely crucially important. And I think, that was a really big lesson. And actually learning that lesson early on kind of really propelled me forward. I think I had faith in my own kind of, showing street photography to ad agencies, and they, and it worked. I did a lot of work for many years based on just a portfolio of funny pictures made in Piccadilly Circus and Oxford Street.
That's brilliant. Yeah, another great bit of advice. So, what has been your favourite photography project?
Oh, well, this is an easy one for me to answer, I think. So I did a project called On the Night Bus, and this came about when I was still living in East Dulwich, South East London, and I was waiting for somebody outside a friend outside a cafe, and it was in the winter, and a bus pulled past, and I was just because I was standing there not doing anything else, I watched all the people on this bus all travelling home to the suburbs from the financial district of London, and it was cold and wet, and there was rain on the windows, and there was condensation inside because everybody was wearing wet clothes, and the bus was full and they were all breathing hot air, and it just looked like a painting. I just looked at one of these upstairs windows, and I just got a sense of a person, a mirage, a figure behind a presence, I suppose, behind the glass, and I just thought, wow, that's beautiful. If you cut out all of the street, all the rest of the bus, all these people walking past, that little view there through that window is absolutely stunning. How can I do that? How can I make that work as a photographer? And that was like the beginning of it all. And I just, it took me a while to work out a technique, using long lenses, shooting at night, image stabilized Canon lenses, and I found a place to do it. I did the project. I shot it all at Elephant and Castle on the raised mezzanine out of the Elephant and Castle shopping centre, which I believe is going. It's being knocked down, isn't it? Yeah. This is what I'm talking about, history happening. It's like every project you do records the state of things as they are, because they're going to change within a year or 2 years or 3 years. The scene will change, the building you took it from will change, the people will be gone. So yeah, basically I spent 3 winters shooting that project, and the Sunday Times magazine published it, and then Hoxton Mini Press, the lovely little boutique publishers in Southeast London, Northeast London, Hackney. They approached me about doing a book, and they produced a beautiful little book of 52 images, and I guess the reason it's my favourite project, I think, is because it just seemed to resonate. It was just so well received. I've never done a piece of work that has resonated with people as much as this project, and that was just really, really nice. I had just inundated with emails and people wanting to buy prints and And it was just so lovely to have such a response to something that you produced. I think that's why it was my favourite, I think. And I think people just saw themselves in these pictures. You know, everyone's been in that situation, travelling home late at night in a big anonymous city where you don't know anybody or expect to see anybody that you know. And the pictures were a lovely combination. They were documentary pictures. So they're just people on the bus, but they looked beautiful. The colours, the condensation, they look very painterly. And I was talking earlier to you about, you know, where street photography meets art. And I think this is a good example. You know, I think I still actually consider that street photography it's a candid public photograph, but not traditional 35mm sort of Cartier-Bresson street photography, which, you know, we kind of associate with that phrase. And that, you know, that's what appeals to me now, I think, working in that sort of area where the pictures are stunning, but they're documentary made. They're completely documentary pictures of real life, but beautiful. If I can do that, you know, I'm happy.
It's a great set of photographs. I really like them. It's interesting because you know, before I knew your name or knew of you or anything like that, I remember seeing the photographs. I can't even remember where I remember seeing them, but I remember seeing them and thinking, wow, those are really cool. What a great idea. And it was almost like street art or something like that, the way they're framed, because of the texture of the condensation. It's almost like it's been airbrushed or something like that. You know, they, like you say, they do very much look like paintings. Having seen a lot on Instagram, it seems to be something that's, whether people are aware of your images or not aware, it seems to be something that's been imitated as well quite a few times. And I'm aware that you know of one case in particular where, you know, it's very much been imitated, that's probably a polite way of putting it. How do you feel about that? I mean, is there some level of pride, or is it, you know, or does it kind of make you angry, or where do you kind of stand on the line between inspiration and just sort of outright kind of plagiarism and stuff like that? Well,
I mean, I don't think you can get too upset about it. You know, we all put our work out there so much now, more than ever, you know, with the internet and social media and image sharing. If you're going to get involved with all of those, you know, forms of reaching an audience, then you have to, you know, the flip side of the coin is that, you know, your work is copied and people are inspired by you and want to make images in a similar way. I just think you have to accept that. You know, I mean, I get a lot of school children, sixth formers doing photography and, you know, writing to me about it and doing a project and so on and reproducing the pictures. And, you know, I really love all that. I've had painters get in touch who've reproduced the pictures as oil paintings and sent me, you know, pictures of those. You know, on the whole, it's a very nice experience. And you know, I mean, nothing is new. Photography is like 170 years old. It's very, very difficult to produce something that you've never seen before. And you know, even my work, my project, The Night Bus, very similar in some respects. I mean, it's different, but it's similar to the project that Michael Wolff did in Tokyo of commuters on the underground, on the subway there. So, you know, we're all influenced and we all influence in turn. And I think you just have to be part of that and get on with it.
Do you want to talk to me about, apologies, I can't remember what you've called it, but your project photographing the reflections in car windows in Piccadilly Circus.
Yes, autos, that is.
Autos.
Yeah.
I really like that. That's a great project.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's a good example. Again, you see, I said that I'm interested in kind of issues a little bit now. And when I went into central London with my young children, I realised how commercialised the spaces were. The public realm is increasingly being used for advertising and selling to us. And it bothered me a little bit, even though I work as an advertising photographer, so which is ironic. You know, that's how I finance my street photography. But, you know, you get in a taxi, there's an advert on the seat in front of you. You go to the toilet, there's an advert on the wall in front of you while you're, you know, relieving yourself. And you walk to Piccadilly Circus or on the motorway, and there are adverts all the time. And I wanted to do something about that. You know, I wanted to show, you know, how advertising is omnipresent in our lives now. And when I was in Piccadilly Circus, I realised that the light of those huge advertising panels, the glow, illuminates the streets and the people who are there. So when a Coca-Cola ad is up, everyone is bathed in Coca-Cola red light. And when an Xbox ad is up on the screen, everyone's bathed in a green light. That particular Pantone green that is, Xbox. It's all branding. It's all being sort of subconsciously absorbed by us all. And I wanted to find a way of photographing that. So, I wanted it to be documentary sort of approach. I didn't want to be setting anything up. But I also wanted the pictures to be as beautiful as the night bus ones had been. I wanted it to be very aesthetically strong. I started off by doing portraits of people, kind of candid portraits of people bathed in the light, but it wasn't giving me that kind of quality that I wanted. And then I just saw these adverts reflected in the side of a shiny new Mercedes car, which again, is a product, a commercial sort of product. And I just thought, that's it. It was like liquid light. And what I loved about it was it just reminded me of pop art and, the way that the pop artists took branding and fonts and colours and, like Warhol's Campbell's soup can and, Lichtenstein's screen prints. I love the way that those sort of panels of colour. It just reminded me of all of that, which was a lovely sort of art history echo in the pictures. Also, I'd never seen anything like it. I had just never seen any pictures like that. And I thought, well, that's a bonus. I've not seen anyone do that before. It was quite tricky. I shot on very long lenses, handheld at night. I had to walk into the traffic quite often, so I could only shoot while the lights were red. And then I had to leap out the road. And it was a little bit dangerous at times. I mean, sometimes I was like literally crouching down in the road as well, So, but I'm really, really pleased with the pictures, and they make beautiful prints. So yeah, I'm always looking for a way to make documentary pictures that are also, really stunning to look at. That's what I'd love to do. Tick both those boxes if I can. I always think that a really good photograph should stimulate the eyes. It should be visually stunning. It should stimulate the mind. It should engage you kind of culturally, or like by referencing art history or so on. But also have an emotional punch, should engage and stimulate you sort of in the chest, in the heart. And I think if you can take pictures which sort of, move you in all three places, then you're doing something right, I guess.
So what have you stopped doing, and why have you stopped doing it?
Okay, well, I think probably the answer to this question is listening to other people. I've stopped listening to other photographers' views on the new work that I'm doing. I've had experiences where people have said to me, I've been working on something and I've had a lot of criticism. I share it with photographers. This happened once, with the In Public group that I was, running. I actually showed them the night bus pictures early on, and they were really disparaging about them. But one of the older guys who's involved with In Public, Bryn Campbell, who was once picture editor of The Observer, very good photographer himself, quite an elderly man now, but a really, really, really terrific character. He emailed me saying, they're wrong. These are fantastic. You must pursue this project. And he was like a lone voice. And it made me realize that actually, if you're creating something new, if you're trying to make something that nobody's done before, that's actually quite challenging for people in a way. I think people are a bit challenged by it or threatened by it almost. And, as a photographer and artist, we are creating, by definition, new stuff. We're trying to make new things. And that's extremely difficult to do, to make something completely different and new. And you have to combine lots of things, I suppose, to try and make something new. There's a kind of alchemy there, bringing different things together, ideas, location, equipment, a certain approach with each project, and learning to kind of reinvent yourself a little bit. The Australian photographer Trent Park, he's very good at doing that. Something I kind of learnt from him. He was one of the In Public photographers, and a lot of his projects, he'll work 35mm high contrast black and white on one project, like Minutes to Midnight, and then he'll shoot with a 6/7 Mamiya in colour, doing huge prints with the next project. And he's kind of constantly reinventing himself. And actually, I think recently he's been working in moving image. He did a project about cricket in film or video. And I think, having the sort of confidence and boldness to not rely on a formula and constantly reinvent yourself is really, really good. I'm getting off the question slightly here, but
that's fine.
So, my recent project, the Exodus series, to go out and do street photography with a great big 24mm tilt shift lens is not the obvious thing to do, but it actually brought something to that series of pictures which really made it look different to what everybody else was doing. And I think sometimes you have to, cross-pollinate from other areas and learn from other people. And using an architectural lens for street photography, why not? It's not the obvious choice, but, you have to try these things. So I think if you listen to other people a little bit and go with the flow, you wouldn't do anything new. So I think probably not listening to people too much and taking, is probably quite a good idea sometimes.
So that actually leads nicely on to the next question, which is, what is the worst bit of photographic advice that you've heard?
Yes. Now, this, I think, is the hardest question for me. I'm a bit of a rule breaker, really. I don't really, as a photographer, I don't really, take pictures in the way that we're kind of all told we should. So, most advice about photography I struggle with a little bit, really, because being creative is about breaking the rules sometimes. The classic is, don't take a picture into the sun. But then, of course, there are the most incredible images made, in the rain and things, shooting into the sun when it's backlit. So, every rule only applies to one circumstance. So, it's very difficult. I can't tell you a single one, a particular individual piece of advice that I think is the worst bit, I'm afraid.
You've answered it. Don't worry.
Yeah,
that's the perfect answer, is that, you just do, again, you just do what you want to do and ignore any rules and ignore any techniques and
just, avoid dogma, photographic dogma, really.
Yeah. We were discussing this as well last week when it's in one of the episodes where it's very easy to scroll down Instagram and kind of not see anything because everything's the same. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, when something is very different for whatever reason, good, it might be bad, but you stop and you have a reaction, you have a response to it. Whereas if everything is following all the rules, everything's going to just look the same.
I mean, I'm quite outspoken on some of these forums and things like that. And, I see people advising people to use filters and LUTs, these lookup tables and things like that. And I just dive in sometimes and I just say, that's somebody else's work. You take a picture and then you apply somebody else's color grading to it and all that kind of stuff. And that's probably my biggest bugbear at the moment on Instagram, that, everybody's using these nostalgic filters and trying to make their pictures look like Sol Leiter Kodachrome, 64 kind of pictures. And I just can't bear that. I just think it's if you make your picture look good by pushing a button, other than the shutter button, just applying a filter that somebody else has made, I don't. It's just too easy to do, isn't it? And it's just, your work's going to look like everybody else's, and it does. The sort of homogenization of street photography on Instagram, has a lot to do with all those sort of filters and things that everybody's all using the same.
So, last question, and I guess this is just rounding up everything we've spoken about so far. But why do you keep taking photographs? What motivates you to keep going out there?
Yeah, I guess after 32 years of doing it for a living, I still find it a challenge, I suppose. And the challenge keeps on changing. Street photography is the most difficult thing I've ever tried to do with a camera. Advertising's quite hard, fashion's hard, doing sports photography's hard, portraits, celebrity portraits, they're all difficult. None of them are as difficult as street photography. going down to Oxford Street, making something out of nothing with a little camera and a standard lens, and no lighting, no models and styling or any of that. Just it's the bare tools. It's almost like the most basic form of photography, but the hardest. And so it's that challenge, I think, that I keep wanting to address. And I just think there's always subjects, there's always issues, and there's always something waiting for you when you go out there. It's the potential of the street. Whenever you go to a public place, it's just changing constantly. It's constantly in flux. People coming, going, picking things up, putting things down, delivering things, vehicles pulling up, light changing. It's just this incredible potential the whole time. And I just love that. I'm just constantly drawn to it. If I'm stuck at my desk working on something, I just know that I'm missing hundreds of pictures on the streets of London. And if it's frustrating, I know they're out there happening all the time. Because I've been there and caught them on lucky occasions. But I think, I just think it's that incredible potential that's out there all the time that, I just think it's fantastic, and nothing captures it like street photography does.
That's brilliant. Nick, thank you very much for answering the questions on the Photo Mentors podcast this week.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it. That's the end of the show. Thanks to Nick for being guest this week and for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I hope everybody out there listening has really got something from that interview. Once again, please share, subscribe, leave a review on the Photo Mentors podcast. You guys are all already really helping to get the podcast to grow. Hasn't gone unnoticed. So thank you to everybody who has supported it so far. See you next time.